Hi, it's Sandy with Sandy Cogdill Designs, and today I am back with yet another slider card. I just can't seem to stay away from them. This is a die set that was a collaboration between Trinity Stamps and Sassy's LLC, and it is one of the easiest interactive card dies that I've used. I am also using one of the cute little gnomes from the Astronomical Gnomes stamp set. I think he is just perfect to be sliding up into the sky, wishing someone a belated happy birthday. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you like this video. You can also subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill or on my blog, www.sandykogdilldesigns. Let's get started. To start this project, I'm going to do a little bit of hot foiling. I am going to use a solid foiling plate from Pink Fresh Studios. I have some leftover foil that I used for other cards, and I had used the Starfield letterpress die. And so I had a number of sheets left over, and I decided I would go ahead and adhere or melt one to a piece of black cardstock. I tend to save all of my little foil scraps, even the ones that have been adhered or foiled onto cardstock, because I find they come in handy later. Now that I have my cardstock foiled, I'm going to use the rocket from the Blast Off die set to cut out the body of my rocket. Then I'll just go ahead and use some scrap black cardstock to do the little stands and the ring around the window. And then I also had some leftover other foiled cards that I used for the inside of the window and for the tip of the rocket. Next, we're creating the little moon layer that my rocket ship is going to be standing on. I'm going to be using the Crater Layers layering stencil and the coordinating die set. I've got a piece of white cardstock cut at 6x6, and I'm going to start ink blending with Lost Shadow Distressed Oxide ink. Once I get that done, I will move my stencil down, place in some layers with Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink, and then I will move my stencil down yet one more time and add those different creases and some depth to the craters. Now with the creases, I used just Hickory Smoke, but then for the craters, I added just a little bit of black soot dye. Once I get that all inked, I will go ahead and use the die that comes with that set and cut out my little moon. I'm going to start inking my background on a 6x6 piece of cardstock. This is the first time I have used Trinity Stamps Blending Buddy brushes, and these are a total game changer for me. They are extremely comfortable to hold in my hand, which means my hand won't get so darn tired. And the other thing is, it just seems to give you so much more control over the amount of ink you're applying. I can't say enough about these. It's like applying butter. It's just amazing. I'm going to start out with Wilted Violet Distressed Oxide ink, and then I will move into Peacock Feathers and then finish up with Prize Ribbon. And I'm just going to do little splotches around that cardstock and kind of blend them together just to kind of give it that galaxy look and feel. Now I'm going to use the Starfield letter press plate and some, I think it's tangerine glimmer foil, and I'm going to get my stars adhered to that background. And then I'm going to cut that piece of paper to 4¼ by 5½, the standard A2 size. In order to create more of that galaxy look, I'm going to take some Distress Oxide ink in black soot, and I'm going to go around all of those outside edges. I'm not too worried about getting the ink on my foiling because I'll just take a soft cloth after I'm done and kind of buff that ink off of the glitter paper or foil paper. Now I need to start planning on where I'm going to be putting that interactive mechanism. I want my gnome to go as far over to the right as possible. So I've just laid my moon surface and my rocket down on my card, and I'm just trying to figure out exactly where I want to place that mechanism. So I've got my what I call my H piece, and I need to cut a notch at the top of my cardstock. That gives a little opening for the recipient to pull out that tab. Plus, it also gives me a little area to stamp out my instructions. So once I get my H, which is placed all the way over even with the right side of that card, I will figure out where my tab goes, and then I will cut the notch out using the included die. Next, I'm going to glue on my moon surface. This is going to help me determine how far down I want my little gnome to go and where I need to place the little die that cuts the slip for the mechanism to move up and down. I know that I'm using my gnome with a little balloon tied to his back, so I've figured out where I want him to end up at the bottom of my card and where I want him to end up at the top of my card. And I've placed my die on the card, and I'll run that through my die cutting machine. I believe, if memory serves me right, that that was placed about 1.75 inches over from the right hand side of the card. I'm taking the tab or the strip that the die cuts, and I'm going to fold that in and out on both sides of that strip to create the little mechanism that slides up and down in that slit. Once I get those folded, I'm going to take a pair of minor tweezers and kind of curl those ends. That is really important. That's a really important step to make sure your little slider piece slides up and down nicely. I don't know exactly what it does other than it relaxes the paper, but if you don't do it, you definitely have some trouble getting that thing to slide up and down. So I'll get those curled and glued, and I'll set that aside and move on to the rest of the card. Okay, I want to beef up that pull tab just a little bit. I don't think one layer of cardstock is enough, especially if you expect people to play with it as often as I do. So I'm going to cut out a piece of purple cardstock using the same die, and then I will cut the notch in the top using that same piece that I used on the card background. I decided that I wanted to kind of help it blend into my galaxy. So I went ahead and I used some Villainous Potion Distress Oxide ink and just kind of inked up the edges of that piece just to kind of give it a little bit more dimension and interest. Once I get that done, I will glue the purple piece of cardstock to my black one and get ready to put the mechanism together. Okay, I have a piece of acetate that I have scrapped off of some packaging, and I've cut that to just a smidgen under 2.25 inches. That opening in the H is 2.25, but you do want to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. I'm going to take some double-sided adhesive and place that along the top of my acetate strip, making sure to not have any of that double-sided adhesive extending out over the sides, because that's going to get caught up on your cardstock and then you're going to have problems when you want it to move. So I'll go ahead and wrap the acetate around my cardstock, adhere it, and then just trim off that little bit of extra acetate. Again, I'm making sure that I'm not pulling too tight on the acetate. I want it to freely move on the H. Next, I'm going to apply another piece of double-sided adhesive tape right on top of where I put the first piece. And then I'm going to take very thin strips, I believe they're an 1/8 inch wide, um, foam tape, and put that on each side of the H. The foam tape that I'm using on this, the little 1/8 inch ones are 1 millimeter in depth. Now I'm going to take that tab that I glued together, slide it through the slit in the background of my card, and then put some double-sided adhesive tape on the back of that piece. I will be attaching the pull tab or the slider piece to that. I want to make sure that my pull tab is centered on that notch. So I'm going to go ahead and place that to the back side of my card. I'll use a little bit of temporary tape to hold it in place, just so it stays lined up nice and neat. And then I'll flip my card back over again. I'm going to remove the little pieces of tape that I have on the slider mechanism, and I am going to line the piece up with the bottom of my slider, or the pull tab, I guess is what I'm going to call that, and press it down just to make sure that when I pull on that, that the slider moves up with it. Now I'm going to take the H piece. I'm going to peel off that second piece of double-sided adhesive I put on it, and I'm going to line up the inside of that H with the bottom of my pull tab. And I'm going to go just right at the very bottom of that. And then I'm going to adhere the H to the back of my card. Now I'm being very careful to make sure that well, it's the right hand side, but it's actually on the left of the screen right now. I'm just going to make sure that that's lined up even with the right hand side of the card. That way I don't have any of the mechanism showing or any of my tape pushing out to the front of the card. I'm going to give it a quick test just to make sure that everything is moving smoothly and that that sliding mechanism is moving up and down easily. I'm going to use some temporary double-sided adhesive just to kind of play around with where I want my gnome to sit on that slider piece. I don't want the balloon to extend up past that notch that I've got cut, and I don't want him to go too far down onto the card. I just want him barely touching the moon surface. Once I have him placed where I want him to be, then I'll go ahead and use some liquid glue to adhere him permanently to that slider. And now comes the fun part. We get to start decorating the front of this card. I did not include any video of me coloring in my little images. I just felt like that was going to make the video go too long. So just to recap, the stamp sets that I've used are Astronomical Gnomes and Out of This World. The Copic colors that I used for this are BG10, BG15, and BG49. Y19, YR16, Y00, Y02, Y13, and Y19 for my yellows. The skin on my gnomes is E00 and E02. For the blues, I've used B000, B00, B02, and B04. For the purples or the violets, I used V12, V15, and V17. The grays are C0, C1, C3, and C4. I did, after I cut out my little images, go back in and color them with some of the grays to kind of cover up the white that kind of goes around the um, the die cuts once you cut them up out. And then I also went back in with my white gel pen and added some highlights to my little gnome and the balloon. Now it's time to start working on the back of my card. I am going to use double-sided adhesive foam tape. On the pieces of the H, I am using 1 millimeter, and I believe that's like an 1/8 inch strip. And then for the rest of the card, I will be using a 2 millimeter foam tape. And the reason I'm using 2 millimeters is because I used 1 millimeter on the front of the H pieces and 1 millimeter on the back of the H pieces. So I want to make sure that I've got mostly all of the area covered up with the foam tape. And then once I do that, I will make sure that I don't have any part of the mechanism catching up on any pieces uh, of adhesive or of the foam tape. Now I'm going to go ahead and seal everything up. I have another piece of cardstock cut at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I've also cut a notch out in the same spot that I have the front of my card cut out at. In few previous videos, I had forgotten to do that, but it does make a huge difference in the ease of making those sliders move up and down. You can just grab onto them much easier. Anyway, I peel off the protective pieces on the inside of my card, and then I line everything up and get that pressed down so that everything's nice and even. And then I'll kind of peek under those corners and peel up the rest of that protective tape. And that pretty much does it for the whole sliding mechanism. For the sentiment, I used the sentiment that came with the Astronomical Gnomes stamp set. I went ahead and just heat embossed them on purple cardstock using white embossing powders, and then I used the coordinating dies to cut out each one of them. The belated birthday is the one that's going to fit on the top of the pull tab, and the oops, I'm light years away is going to go at the bottom of my card. And that's pretty much it for this particular card. Thank you so much for following along with the process today. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to my channel to be notified of future videos. You can follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill or on my blog, www.sandycogdilldesigns.com.